Everybody, welcome back to Vets4Vets in the Philippines. This is going to be a part 2 with Loran Osborne, the VSO representative that we have that's going to be with us on a regular basis now. So look forward to having him on here, and so we'll welcome Loran back to the channel.
Okay, and then so at that point in time, if they had problems with their communications, I would do on-site troubleshooting and function repair, and it went from that to a program management. And Sun Microsystems was in contact with us. They're the ones that did the ASIP radio.
Yep.
And we were working at that point in time with the Cayman MRAP. And the Cayman MRAP was unique in that it had radio stacks that were behind and to the side the gunner inside of a separate armored area. And the gunner would actually have to descend from their hatch while moving on convoy and process frequency changes. And because the old ASIP handset changer didn't work with them, they didn't function well. If you were using the old ANCD, which a lot of people on this channel will know, because that's from the old days. The SyncGars.
Yep,
if you were using that,
well, there's a few of them out there that would probably remember the Prick 9, but
well, sure. Yes. We were using the Prick 52 for mobiles, Vest mobiles.
Yep.
But if you were using that, then the handset worked fine. But whenever you went to the SKL, the simple keyloader, that was no longer functional. So we worked together with Sun Microsystems and a couple of other people to create a separated radio face that had the face of an ASIP, but with two heads inside of it, and then it went through cables back to the face of the actual radio stacks and mounted right in front of the gunner's feet. So basically, as long as they didn't kick the radio face, the driver or the TC could effect frequency changes on both radios and even load new keys and new security information through it.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And at that point in time, our Blue Force trackers were integrated a lot better, and we were it was a great force multiplier.
Yeah.
And that was direct integration between myself, my communications program that we put together, and Sun Microsystems. So I made some good friends that year.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So how long was you in Iraq?
We were there for 12 months. We were one of the first deployments to come underneath the 15 months to the under 15-month rule.
Right.
And it was about 2 years after we came back when they processed down to the 9-month deployments.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But our deployment was functional for 2 reasons. We were there to provide a response force during elections to protect the Iraqi people and make sure that they could vote freely without being influenced by local area insurgents and organized militias that were trying to influence the vote for someone other than the Democratic candidates.
Right.
And the secondary purpose that we had there was called spoke reintegration.
Okay.
And that was actually fostered in Afghanistan, but kind of made its way across to Iraq, in that we were turning large portions of the country back over to the Iraqi security forces. And so our FOBs were being emptied out, and U.S. materials and supplies were being scaled back to major contingency operating bases, or COBs, like Cobb Spiker.
Yeah.
So as we traveled up and down what began as MSR Tampa and then turned into MSR 1, that traveled all the way from Mosul down to Joint Base Balad, as we traveled back and forth across that, we were going off to the sides and scaling down different forward operating bases and collecting what we could for U.S. materials and selling what we couldn't to the Iraqis so that it could be reutilized by them. And it was a lot of movement with the load handling system and the PLS, the palletized loading system vehicles.
Yep.
As well as, of course, fluid transfers and stuff, big smifties of water and fuelers.
Yeah.
And as we were doing that, we began trying to implement some of the things that we were doing with the U.S. soldiery with the Iraqis. partnership things where we would have security elements stand out, and we would work with some of the family members. We had a couple of invitational soccer games with the kids in some of the neighborhoods, and that was really interesting. We handed out a lot of food and a lot of water and a lot of toys. Believe it or not, people were sending toys over in tough box care packages, and we were passing them out all over the place because, and once again, not to get political, but the fact of the matter is there's always been a strong dichotomy in the American people as to whether or not we should have ever been involved in the Middle East, because the information that they get from their leadership is that we were unwelcome occupiers. And that wasn't what the boots on ground were seeing. We saw some unruly influence from way up high. And there may have been some influence of oil and some other things there that were motivating our reasons for being in certain areas. But the fact that when we got there, kids wouldn't even walk outside their door for fear of getting shot. When we left there, they were playing soccer games in the streets. When we arrived there, a family couldn't drive to the grocery store. They would walk behind houses like they were hiding in alleys. And to go to markets, and if they made it to the market without any problems, it was a good day. But when we left there, the university was thriving so much that they would meet our trucks as we drove through on convoy at 2 o'clock in the morning to wave American flags and shout and celebrate that we were there. So we made a very positive impact while we were there that was completely sight unseen by most of the mainstream media and the people who adhere to it.
Yeah, and you know that's been a lot of us is, like you say, to stay out of the political side of it, but that's been with a lot of us is, that kind of stuck in our craw, to say an old redneck saying, we did a lot of good there, but it just wasn't recognized, in a lot of ways back in the States.
It was very similar, although different, with the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
There was a lot of hearts and minds involved in it, and there were a lot of people who were very pleasantly affected by what we were doing. But because of insurgent elements and because of that whole identification friend or foe, where it was practically impossible to know who was a friend or a foe, because the guy that sold you cigarettes the day before could be the guy with the improvised bomb on his chest tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah.
And because of that, there's a lot of people who don't understand living in a lifestyle like that and wondering why we made the judgment calls that we did.
Right. And that's like, you and I have visited about this a lot, and and many other veterans I visit with, that's part of that learning from past history, that us as soldiers, we've kind of taken a lot of that and implemented our past history. We've seen what happened in Vietnam. We carried forward and know that that we can play a good, have a good aspect of things and bring forward good to what we're doing. Right? We've seen how the Vietnam veterans were treated coming back, so we wanted to try to do better than that this time around. Desert Storm, Desert Shield. OF1. All the way through. We was looking at trying to better that, and so in the same way with in country.
Right. And then, of course, we also had other things which were impacting us with Vietnam. As we began to close down Vietnam, we began recognizing that our defoliant and antifungal agents were actually making people sick, and that's when a lot of the studies about Agent Orange, Pink, Blue, and White came out, and we were also looking at the terrible effects of DDT and other dioxin-based toxins.
Yes.
And it seems like every war comes with its challenges, because when folks came back, that was unheard of.
Exactly.
It took 20 years to begin seeing any grants in that, and now we have the Gulf War illness. What do they call it? The MUCME, multi-symptom, unclassified medical, whatever. And the fact is there are still soldiers, myself included, who suffer from symptoms of that, who are fighting with the Veterans Affairs to get that recognized
and recognized. And that's it. PTSD, is prime example of another. Post traumatic stress syndrome. look
That's
at the
one that the VA really did respond to after Vietnam, though.
after Vietnam. That's what I was just getting ready
Yeah.
to say. We talked about the negative side, the DDT and the Agent Orange, Max that was on the other day, he was talking about a friend of his that was in Texas that didn't get recognized till a couple years ago, right?
Right.
But then the PTSD did get seen. It might not have been fully implemented like we'd like to see it in the Veterans Administration at the time, but it was started, and it kept building on itself. I remember what it was like in the first part of the '80s, hitting the Veterans Administration, mid '80s, late '80s. Man, I got horror stories, and then now
and the
5 years
VA
ago,
is still fighting that.
it's
Veteran
still
service
fighting it.
organizations
Yeah.
are answering for things that happened 20 years ago.
Right.
When I went through my period, almost 2 years as working as a veteran service officer with the American Legion, you would have soldiers that came back from Vietnam, Grenada, Panama. They would come through and they would say, "Well, I came in whenever I first got back, and you guys," and then of course.
Yeah.
I was
You were one of them.
I wasn't there,
but you were one of them.
You guys didn't told me there was nothing you could do for me. You guys told me this is out of our hands, and that's not service connected. And I said, this is a different culture now.
Right. And see, and that's one of the things, that's why I think it's so great we have you coming on board with us on the channel. Not that you're the perfect subject matter expert, because none of us are. It's kind of like the tax code. That's what I describe.
Right.
People ask me what the VA system's like, and I said, well, you know what the tax code's like? You seen last year's tax code book? Just look at that and then amplify it by 2. Max, he hadn't seen since 1972, 74. And then now we're looking at 2017, 2018. I get him finally back up to the Veterans Administration, right? All that whole time span. He just didn't know. He didn't have a serious injury, but he had stuff he could have been monitoring, along, his shoulders, hearing loss, all those things.
Yeah.
And they just told him at that time, this is all you're going to get. This is all we're going to do. And he took that, and he took his, he had the Vietnam era Veterans educational program. He used that and went through schooling and figured, okay, that's all I'm getting, and then we're sitting just like you and I are at a round table of about 4 other veterans, of our era time frame, and here he is, Vietnam era, and another gentleman there, Vietnam era, and we're all talking about doing this and doing that in the VA, and they're going, "You can do that?" They'll do hearing tests, and you can't blame them. And understand there was a lot of bad karma with a lot of these guys when they came back. They had a bad taste in their mouth with the Veterans Administration, had a bad taste about the military, so all they didn't want nothing to do with it. But yet they still are entitled those privileges and rights,
And absolutely, and that's the thing that you got to get through to people. That there's one thing that I ran into a lot, and working back and forth in Independence as a mobile agent down there, I noticed also is that people seem to get this concept that they're not entitled to things because there are other people who are more injured.
Right.
There are other people who are suffering worse than them. I can't go and file for my benefits because that double amputee with Agent Orange hasn't got his yet.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that while I can't say there's an unlimited pool of funds that just gets handed out, the fact is that senators and congressmen who have done literally nothing else right in their entire 30-year span have ensured that for the most part, when soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and coasties come home, there is a pool of benefits which is legitimately available to them if they only but file.
Exactly.
And the big fall down is most of them don't even know how to file, so when they file, they shoot themselves in the foot.
Right.
And that was something I ran into a lot. It's not that they're not eligible for those things, but the way that they filed removed their eligibility.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you and I have heard it, and all the vets that's on here and those that are listening. The VA math on comp and pensions rating. Who understands that? Guys will say, "Well, I got this."
Actually, I can give you an excellent tool for that.
I'll get you on one with that. But where I was going with it is just like you were saying, most veterans kind of shoot themselves in the foot. One, lack of knowledge and understanding. They don't have the data when they go in that they need.
not the proper forms that they were filing, missing deadlines, and
exactly.
then the major one is the CNP examination.
Yep.
If you don't know what you're saying when you walk into a CNP examination, you will make yourself ineligible for everything.
Exactly, and and the problem a lot of us had, and I got into that rut, about the time frame you and I met, because I was going through my third injury, at the time when you and I met, right? When you were going through your knees and the surgery, we were two broke soldiers basically, and non-deployable at that time, right? But I was burnt out because you would go in and they would say, well, in CMP, and you would say, well, this hurts. This is why it hurts. This is what it did. We only knew what we was doing, and you felt like you were being put on trial.
Yes.
Yes. And that wasn't what it was
about. The lay
about.
statement may not have the same probative benefit as a medical officer's statement, but it is definitely supposed to maintain at least a 50% probative value unless it can be empirically disproven.
Exactly.
And the problem is in the 80s and early to mid 90s, even all the way up until I would say 2001, 2002, you were fighting an evidentiary standard where they argued against the veracity of a lay statement. They would make you have to jump through hoops, and it's even still that way in some doctors, some medical professionals, and I'm not going to name names, but even at the facility that I was most recently working at here in Wichita, Kansas, there are people there who would rather utilize speculation or guesswork as to what their limited knowledge of what that soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine were doing at the time than listen to the lay statement because they must be speaking out of the side of their mouth.
Right, and you almost felt like, I've heard many veterans go, over the years just on roundtable, sitting like this with a cup of coffee saying, dude, I go in there and I feel like I'm on trial. Or I feel like they think I'm lying to them, and
then they walk out the door and the last phrase the VA ever hears over the shoulder is, what's the point?
Exactly. And that's, been, you've been sharing with us and about your calling to fill a need in there, and you and I both agree that's a wonderful deal, and that's where my calling come in about the time when we were there in Fort Riley together, is that looking out for the veteran that's on the outside that just doesn't realize what's there. There is so many veterans, that, and I was one of them. I was burnt out. I was mad. I was done with the 10% rating and filing an appeal and being denied, not understanding, okay, use the VFW or the American Legion and use the VSO officer. Well, you and I got to remember the times when that was happening, and not to put down any VSO officer because they all done what the best they could do, but most of those VSO officers was our dads or grandfathers' ages. So they they came out of the Korea Vietnam era, right? And it was a total different thing when what we were seeing coming out of Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Grenada, OEF-1, OEF-2, all the things that we were seeing on the comeback on there. It was some of the same symptoms and feels, but it was a different standard in how things was being handled. And not to any fault of the VSO officers themselves, but they weren't being kept up to date. They weren't being
and nowadays the VSO that actually that keys into a really good point. The veteran service programs for both the VFW and American Legion are now required to recertify and take update classes between 1 to 2 times yearly, and that keeps them up to date on CAVC, that's Court of Appeals for Veteran Claims, and Board of Veteran Appeals cases, and their precedential effect, and also different places where the CFR 38, which is basically the claims Bible, how that updates. They now certify twice yearly, once yearly if necessary, twice yearly is preferred. And the fact of the matter is what you're saying, it's still the case in a lot of places because the veteran service organizations have gained too much of a reputation for being a place to talk over your beer about old wartime stories and smoke and get drunk. And the fact of the matter is that if you're not a member of them, you can't be a veteran service officer.
Right.
So the younger crowd doesn't really project over there. A lot of the people you're still seeing are early Vietnam era to mid Vietnam era that are still sitting in those positions. I know my former supervisor had been doing it for 25, 27 years.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, where does that place you in connection with veterans that are coming out of an area you don't understand or connect with?
Well,
we were fortunate at Robert J. Dole to have a younger Marine, 40 something, early 40 something, and a couple of younger American Legion and some of the other eras represented there. Even AMVETS and DAV had some younger agents there, but the most part, when you go to other hospitals and other facilities, you're looking at people that are in their 60s, their 70s, and they're not understanding.
Right. Well, and it's an age difference, and it's a military cultural difference in the sense, what you came through.
Exactly.
Right? And like you're saying, and now they're doing some things to help reinforce that. We're seeing that even in the VFWs. Up in Minnesota, the VFW up there, the new post commander is 45 years old. Totally unheard of 10 years ago as a post commander at that age. Nobody, VFW and American Legion about died out, really, be honest with you, up till, our Desert Storm, Desert Shield. They were just no young guys really staying in them, very few. So,
and you're still seeing a lot of post closures nowadays because they'll get into that cliquish, good old boy club mentality. And they'll be running around in circles trying to get membership when they're still electing the same people over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's not changing anything. So when the young bloods get in there and they're fired up and they want to get involved, the old people are all like, no, well, slow and steady wins the race. And then the young people
bingo
will
on
leave
Friday
the post.
nights. And there's nothing wrong with bingo, don't take me wrong. But
right. But then when all the young people leave the post, you have lost all your fire.
Exactly.
And then your post closes a few years later, and everybody's wondering why these veteran service organizations aren't as valuable and invested as they used to be. It's because the blood is aging, and the new blood's not staying.
Yeah. Well, it's I think that's in any organization or job field. If you don't stay up with the culture, the time, or the education, or the training, or the knowledge of the era of what you're in, whether you and I both come from an aviation maintenance background. Chinooks, Hueys, Chinooks, Chinook. If we didn't stay up to date, you and I couldn't walk in right now and do anything on a Chinook. We would remember a lot of it, but we're not qualified. We're not quantified or ready to step back in. We need to be re-updated, So, and it's the same in what the VA and staying in it. That's one of the things I'm really glad to see. I've had good experience. I think it's a lot in the area where you're at. You talked about Wichita, Kansas. I've done a lot of my first original stuff through Wichita VA. Then my last experience has been with the Florida VA, down in Florida at Fort Myers. And man, I'm telling you, I was totally blown away to leave Belize with a heart attack on a 2.5-hour flight, land in I landed in Florida there, but where the Disneyland or whatever it's called there.
That U.S. POE in Orlando. The port of entry.
Yeah, I landed at Orlando. Came in, got a friend picked me up, an old service buddy from Fort Riley, and his wife are there, retired. He's down there. Picked me up and drove me to the emergency room at the VA. Right? This is 24 hours after I'd had the heart attack, got my blood pressure down, long story of the story. But I walked in there, and they had just opened up a brand new cardiology there, and the whole 9 yards. I was there 7 days, got 3 stents, and I never seen a VA work so good in my life.
Well, the fact of the matter is they're starting to get a new infusion of money and authority, too.
Exactly.
We're looking at integration techniques and technologies that are putting civilian medical care and the VA in direct competition with one another, and that's actually occurred under President Trump.
Yes.
Where he's fostered an expansion for the old community care program called the Mission Act, and the Mission Act is forcing the VA to meet the standard or exceed the standard of civilian healthcare in order to keep those patients coming in.
And
otherwise, the patients will not only go to civilian providers, but the VA has to pay for it.
exactly. Exactly. And see, that's I'll, offline we can get political, but here I don't, but as much as possible. But that's one of the things I can say that I can see a change in the VA right now is in how things are being processed, how you're being treated when you walk in the door. It's amazing to see the difference in it. I know they took pity on me a lot when I would come up there because I had to fly back and forth for appointments, knowing that I was flying 2.5 hours from another country to get into a VA hospital, and I could only be there a certain amount of days. I could show up and get call and get appointments, and they would have them ready for me. Of course, they schedule some, but a lot of times I could call and say, look, can you get me 3 appointments in these 3 days so I can see this specialist, and this specialist, and have my blood work done, all this stuff, because this is the time frame I can come. Can you do that? And she'd go, oh, let me see. Oh, yeah, I'll move this around. You come, we'll have it ready for you. And I'd show up, so, that was like Max the first time we took him there. He hadn't been in a VA hospital for, 1972. We'll call it 72, 74. And, first thing he had to do is go get his card, right, And, and he says, what's this, And I said, that's your ID card for everything here, But he's seen 5 different departments in 4 different days on walk-ins.
Oh yeah.
And
that's changed. And now,
10 years ago,
I don't know how long it's been since you walked back in the POE, but now you can.
2 years.
Yeah. As of January of 2020, you can actually take that same service-connected card and walk onto a military post, go to the commissary, the exchange, pick up your duty-free stuff that you want to get before you fly back out.
Exactly. Yeah. And see, that's just it. And, how many I know that's gotten a little bit more publicized. I kind of stepped, but I can tell you 20 veterans that I know in Belize that I haven't talked to in the last year and a half don't know that, because they've just stayed out of this contact with everything. They just got burnt out with the system, and that happens. But well, Loran, I'm looking forward to our next one. I'm sure we can share. You can share a little bit more where you're headed in the future. We'll do that on the next one, where you're headed in the next step of your career path. But I thank you and appreciate you coming on and sharing with us and having the opportunity to continue to do so. And once again, from me, from the bottom of my heart, as a brother, as a brother in arms and brother in the Lord, of course, I thank you for the service, and I thank you what you continue to follow a calling that a lot of people don't take up, and if they do, they don't stick with it. And that's selfless service, and that service, that servant's attitude that you carry with. And I know there's a lot of people you've touched out there in the veterans community with it. Appreciate it, and look forward to our next one.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that, and I look forward to our next interview as well.
You bet. All right, Loran, I salute you. You have a good one, and we'll see you guys out there next time.
Yes, sir.